participating in the poll.
All right, well, welcome everyone to our first fall webinar, the first in a series of 2 that we'll be doing this fall with Suzanne Bontempo. The theme here, the title is Falls for Planting, the waterwise approach to growing a healthy garden starts now. My name is Emily Corwin. I'm a senior environmental engineer at the Fairfield-Sassoon Sewer District, and I manage the Solano Stormwater Alliance, which is a collaboration between the cities of Fairfield, Sassoon City, City of Vallejo, and Vallejo Flood and Wastewater District. And we're all working together to make the water that runs off of our cities, these cities, cleaner as it gets to the Sassoon Marsh and to the San Francisco Bay. And one of the ways that we can do that is by implementing good practices in our homes and in our gardens for managing pests. And Suzanne Bontempo has 20 years, over 20 years of work as a professional gardener, and she's the manager of the Our Water, Our World work, and it has experience as an environmental educator, teaching the principles of integrated pest management for sustainable, eco-friendly pest management around the home and garden. So with that, I'll pass it to Suzanne for our program, and I'm sure she'll mention this, but we'll have time at the end for questions. But please also, if you have questions that come up throughout, please put them in the chat and we'll keep track of them and do our best to answer during this hour. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much, Emily, and thanks everyone for joining us. I'm really excited. Yes, we're going to talk about falls for planting, and a waterwise approach to growing a healthy garden starts now. So I'm going to go through slides for a little less than an hour, but I've blocked out the whole hour for us. And then there'll be time for your questions at the end. And as Emily mentioned, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat or the Q&A. And what we're going to learn is an introduction to the Our Water, Our World program and integrated pest management principles for those of you that aren't familiar with it. And for those of you that are familiar, this will be a little review, but it'll be very brief. And then we're going to dive into why fall season is the best time to add new plants to the garden, how to set our plants up for success. And we're going to look at ways to hold onto the rainwater when those rains do arrive. So the Our Water, Our World program is now a statewide program, and we are also a national award-winning program. And so this program was designed to bring awareness between pesticides and their impact on water quality. And we partner with water pollution prevention agencies and retailers that sell pesticides and provide integrated pest management education. And with integrated pest management, we're able to solve pest problems, guide our customers that visit those retail outlets and the retail associates. We train them on the principles of IPM so that we can guide the consumers to make choices for solving those pest problems with a less toxic approach, with the intention of not polluting the waterways. You might be familiar with our program. We've got the fact sheets that you can access in the stores or online. QR codes also allow us to access those fact sheets digitally. And then you'll see the little blue tags that will identify eco-friendly products that will not pose a threat to our water. And why do we care so much about water? Well, let's just share that we all live in some type of a watershed, right? And when rain falls on the open land, or if snow, or when snow is melting from the Sierras, the water that isn't being absorbed into that ground at that time is running off. It's going to move towards a local waterway. It could be a stream, a creek, a river, all the way down to an estuary, a bay, the ocean. And along the way, it's bringing any pollutants that might be there. Those pollutants could look like litter and trash, pet waste, and chemicals. And for us, through the lens of Our Water, Our World, we are here to reduce the pesticide and fertilizer chemicals that are entering the waterways. And we do that by looking at our gardens, our landscapes as its own watershed. And when water falls on that, on our gardens, on our properties in the form of rain, or if we've got an irrigation break or any type of a water leak that's moving across our properties, and it's going to find its way to a local storm drain or creek, it's also bringing any pesticide residuals or synthetic fertilizers that we may have used with it. So just know that our properties are a really great place for us to reduce those pesticide pollutants by switching the way we look at pest management. And since we teach integrated pest management, what integrated pest management is, for those of you that aren't familiar with, it is a decision-making process. So it allows us to look at the system as a whole. Today we're talking about the garden, but pests do come into the home as well. But we use science-based strategies to solve these pest problems. But oftentimes what we want to do is really look at the problem and identify what's really going on. Oftentimes what we're seeing are symptoms of a problem. And so once we can identify that problem, then we can look to manage that problem. The way we manage the problem in integrated pest management, the actions we take are called controls. So cultural controls, bolstering the health of the garden. And we're going to look at a lot, pretty in depth with this program today, increasing the health of the garden. Another control would be mechanical controls. These are the tools we use to manage the pest problem. Biological controls, which are the beneficial living organisms that we use to manage the pest problem. And then the chemical controls, which are the pesticides. We're always going to use the least toxic, the eco-friendly products when we need to. And we're really looking at always using these as a last resort when we've exercised all of the other steps. All right, so now let's look at why we want to take advantage of the fall season to add plants to our garden. So why is fall the best time? We are experiencing shorter daylight hours, so we might still have a really warm, sunny, hot day in the 80s, but it's a shorter day and we have cooler evening temperatures. So the cooler evening temperatures really are going to support those plants as they are becoming established. We are expected to get some rains, so hopefully we're going to have wetter weather. Historically, we typically get all of our rain during the winter months. We're about 8 months until the heat of the summer is at its peak, and we're about 10 months until the driest summer season is upon us. So we've got quite a bit of time for those plants to become established without the stresses of the heat and the dry. So that is why this is the best time to add plants to our garden. So for Solano County, the monthly rainfall, as you can see, is typically going to start in October. And then really by December, January, and February, we are getting the most precipitation. And then as you can see, as we get into the summer months, it is pretty much very minimal. And that's when we're really looking at, by September, or really October, if we haven't had rains yet, we are really, our established trees that are not on irrigation are really looking forward to some rain. So then we're also going to look at how we could set our plants up for success. We're going to choose native varieties to plant, and plants that actually require less water once established. That's what we're really going to focus on. We're going to, when we add plants to our garden, we're going to group them together so they can share similar water needs, so that we can water them with ease, provide them with the irrigation that they need with a lot of ease. We're going to water deeply to grow healthy root systems as those plants become established. We're going to maintain healthy soils and apply mulch to protect those soils and to protect those root zones. We're going to look at how we can keep water on site, how we can hold on to that rainwater. And we're going to dive a little bit more into all of these points in a moment. But keeping water on site, we're going to think about slowing it, spreading it, sinking it, and storing it. And then we're going to look at providing healthy, regular garden maintenance. So when we're looking at adding plants to our garden, we really want to choose climate appropriate plants. And what that means is choosing California and Mediterranean natives that are going to thrive and adapt to our summer dry climate. But we also want to match plants to the conditions of our garden. And when we do that, we can keep them from being stressed. And then we would also be keeping them from being more susceptible to pest problems, because when plants are stressed, either from lack of water or inefficient irrigation, or from being over fertilized or under fertilized, or not getting enough sunshine or getting too much sunshine, then they're not going to grow appropriately. They're actually going to be really stressed out, and they're going to most likely show signs of pest problems, either in the form of an insect or a disease or dieback, things like that. And then also know that when we're looking to add plants to our garden, oftentimes there are varieties that are pest and disease resistant. So if they're, for instance, I have a fairly climate appropriate garden, but I still really like roses. But when I add roses to my garden, I am for sure adding the disease resistant varieties, because I don't want to increase the risk of more black spot rust and things like that might be circulating in my garden if I'm bringing in a rose that's prone to it. And then we also want to choose plants that can support the complex food webs that surround us. I'm a huge fan of supporting the ecology of the garden, and oftentimes we don't notice the ecology of our garden is going to also include some very tiny micropollinators, beneficial insects, and then our birds. Our birds do an amazing service to help us with pest management. And then many of us are looking at replacing our lawn, switching our lawn out for plants that will require less water once established. And boy, this slide could not be large enough. This is just my top 4 that I would maybe consider or recommend, 2 lawn or turf style replacements. That would be the red fescue and the meadow grass, or walkable ground covers. Diamondia, that has that beautiful little yellow flower, it kind of looks like a daisy, is such a toughie. It is my #1 go-to. It can handle the hottest, sunniest, baking hot sun conditions that I know many of you in Solano County and throughout some of the hotter spots of California are faced with, as well as creeping thyme. Creeping thyme is incredibly tough. It really can take that hot, baking down sun. As long as we are providing it with some irrigation, it will need, I would say, moderate to light irrigation once established, but much less than a lawn. And the thyme is really cool because it has those beautiful little purple flowers that the pollinators absolutely love. So here are some resources that you can find more information about lawn substitutes or climate appropriate plants for your specific garden. So it's the Arboretum All-Stars, it's the California Native Plant Society, CalScape, and then your local master gardeners. Their website has an amazing list of plants that are going to be appropriate for our gardens, that'll be water-wise, that'll support habitat and so forth. And so when I mentioned grouping plants with similar water needs together, this is called hydrozoning. And when we are choosing plants, when we're at the nursery and we're buying some new plants, we want to really understand what are its water needs once established, and then we're going to add it to the area of our garden that it's going to match. So if I've got an area of my garden that has some space and I wanted to fill it in with a plant, I want to make sure I'm only choosing a plant that's going to be appropriate for that location. So we're going to look at plants that can that would share similar water needs once that plant is established. And while that plant is becoming established, I'm going to be hand watering it. I'm not adjusting the irrigation to what I've just newly planted. I'm keeping the irrigation set for that zone, and I'm going to supplement that new plant with water and as it becomes established. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But we're also going to consider all the other microclimate needs, such as the sun exposure, the shade, the wind, the heat, and the soil. How is that plant going to grow and expand in the soil conditions that are right there with the other plants? So it does take a little bit of research, really once we find, once we've done a little investigation and we see that space where we have what plant would be appropriate, we have to narrow it down to all of those, the water needs, the other microclimate needs. And then it really is comes down to just a few plants that would be appropriate for the space once we do that. And then for those of us that have irrigation systems, we are going to adjust the controllers for the season. These are not set it and forget it systems. We're really out there about every month, every 6 weeks, adjusting to our longer daylight hours, or as the daylight hours shorten, the season, how water is evaporating out of our soil, what are the needs, and how often does the irrigation really need to run. For most of the state is under some type of water restriction. And what I've seen from many water agencies is that they're suggesting that folks water from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. Well, through the lens of a pest management educator, I would like to say, please do not water your plants from 8 a.m. to until I would say, that evening temperatures, the 8 a.m. Into the early morning hours, because what we all have been faced with are a lot of pests that like those cool, moist evenings. I would say slugs, snails, earwigs, black spot rust, just to name a few, will really thrive if we're watering in the middle of the evening. What I highly recommend is that we are watering at those sunrise hours. So that 4 a.m. to 6 a.m., we can push it to about 7 a.m., but those are really the ideal hours that we should be watering our garden. And so it's really important to inspect for leaks. We want to make sure the water is going where we want it to go. Okay, we always want to make sure those emitters are in place and they're releasing the water where at those root zones. And when possible, for those of us that have pop-up sprinklers around the garden, or the sprinklers that are on those stationary risers, we want to look at switching to a drip irrigation system. So check the local agencies for rebates that you can get for smart controllers and for switching your pop-up sprinklers to drip. That is going to be a lot of money that you can save when you could take advantage of these awesome rebates. And then when we do water, we want to understand that the plant is not only growing, but the roots are growing also. So when we plant that plant, the plant is going to, that root zone is going to be the shape, most likely the shape and size of the pot it came in. So when we get that pot, that plant, we take it out of the pot, we score the sides of those root zones with that handy dandy plant tag that it came with. We score those sides, we, scratch it all up. We want to encourage those roots to start to grow out and down. And we're going to focus the water at that outer edge of that root zone. And over time, as those roots grow, we're bringing the water at a broader circumference, and we're going to apply water for a little bit longer so that water can go a little deeper to drive roots down and out. And we do that with water. So here's an illustration that shows how we want to establish these nice deep root systems by watering out at that drip line. So that illustration on the top right corner is actually an aerial, or like a top view of an illustration of a tree, but this really applies to any plant Okay, so we see those fibrous root hairs expanding way past the drip line of the canopy. So the canopy of that plant is right here. We want to focus our watering beyond that. And the reason why we want to water deeply to encourage deep roots is because on those days of excessive heat, the surface water on, that's in the top couple inches of the soil is going to evaporate out very quickly. But those root zones are still able to access moisture deeper down. If we're watering shallowly, what does shallow look like? Oh, 5 minutes every other day, or 3 minutes every day. A lot of people have their irrigation set up for very shallow watering every day or every other day. Well, when that excessive heat comes on, that water evaporates out and that plant is starving and needing water. And then the irrigation comes back on and it's fine. And then that excessive heat evaporates that water, and then that plant's really thirsty. It's like, please water me. And when this is happening over a period of time, that plant is stressed and then is going to be more prone to problems, pest problems, dieback, things like that. We build healthy soils by adding compost. Compost is an organic matter that has been eaten by bacteria and fungus and microbes and worms and other decomposers, okay? And it is the healthiest, most amazing thing you can add to your soil. It will improve that soil structure. It will retain moisture. It holds 5 times its weight in water. When we're adding, 5% compost to our soil, we're quadrupling the water holding capacity. So please, compost is amazing. It also increases the microbiology in the soil. It recycles nutrients. It reduces the needs for chemical fertilizers and pesticides. It is actually, when we add compost to our soil, we're actually reducing pest problems because it increases the health of the plant that much. How we get soil compost into the soil is that we're going to mix it into the soil at the time of planting. But then for plants that are already established, we can top dress around that root zone with a nice inch or two of compost under that layer of mulch. We can also water in compost in the form of compost tea. When we feed our plants, we're going to feed them with organic fertilizers. Okay, so what are organic fertilizers? Organic fertilizers are derived from organic matter, such as mushrooms, manures, compost, kelp, bone and blood meal, not derived from fossil fuels. They often have lower NPK numbers. So what we see are numbers on that bag or the box or the container that might be 444 or 321 or 0, 0.5, 0.5. I mean, really low numbers. And you'd think, what the heck? They're not even providing enough. But it's really all of those other micronutrients in those cases that are going to really provide the service to our plants. And when we're feeding with organic fertilizers, we're actually feeding the microbiology, which allows the root zones of the plants to take up the nutrients on an as-need basis. Organic fertilizers, like any fertilizers, are going to come in the form of liquid or granular, so you can determine which is going to be the easiest for you to apply. And when we are looking at those numbers on the fertilizer bag or box, what do those numbers mean? Well, we're looking at the N, the P, and the K. So nitrogen is going to focus the above ground growth. So anything that's above ground is going to really flourish when we're adding, when we have a high nitrogen number. P, phosphorus, is really going to support the root growth of that plant as well as bud bloom. Okay, so it's going to really establish the cells that will produce buds that would really produce flowers and food for us. And then the K is the potassium, which is really going to be all around growth, above and below ground growth. When we are looking at these bags or, these fertilizers, we're looking at the NPK. When we are in the heat of the summer, it is not advised to fertilize with high nitrogen number. So we really want to keep those nitrogen levels low through the growing season of the summer months. We really just want to start to, when we plant, I always recommend just planting like an all-purpose fertilizer. Those numbers will be fairly even, but then through the growing season of the summer, we're going to have a lower nitrogen number and maybe a higher PK. So it might be like a 3-6-6, something like that. And what we're looking at is that those are actually part of the macronutrients. So it's the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the potassium, but it also is going to have sulfur, calcium, and magnesium in there as well. And then the organic fertilizers will be loaded with a lot of micronutrients, such as the iron, the zinc, the copper, the manganese, boron, and so much more. So when we're feeding with organic fertilizers, it's a much more sustainable way to feed our plants, and it's going to be very well-rounded. And then we're going to take advantage of all the benefits of mulch. Mulch is going to be in the form of, like, let's say, wood chips that are spread over the surface of the soil to protect that soil, to insulate that root zone, and to prevent erosion, things like that. And mulch can be made of a number of materials such as bark, wood chips, leaves, lawn clippings, straw, newspaper. In fact, right now we have a lot of deciduous trees losing their leaves, and that is actually nature's mulch. That is that tree's way to protect and insulate its root zone for the coming cooler months. And then also, as those leaves break down, they're going to add organic matter to that root zone, feeding that plant. Mulch can also be in the form of oyster shells, gravel, landscape fabric, and rubber, but we're going to focus on the natural materials. These are the materials that are going to actually feed the soil microbiology as they decompose. So this is what you want to focus on. And then understand why we use mulch and why it's so important. Is the number one reason is that soil, or number one reason for me, is that soil is hydrophobic. Okay, so if we have soil that does not have a protective layer on it in the form of mulch, it will create a hard shell. It will get really hard and dry, like a crust, to the point where we couldn't even get a pickaxe through it in some cases. So, and then when we are to actually get rain, or if we are to water that area, that water will just bead right off and run to the point of least resistance, which is typically off the property and into a storm drain or a creek or somewhere else. But when we put that nice 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch on top, it's going to aid with that water infiltration, because it's going to prevent that crust. So when we do have mulch, that water is able to infiltrate with ease. It's going to reduce evaporation significantly. So when we have that 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch on top of that soil, it's going to reduce the water evaporation so much that we will be able to water less often. So 20 to 70% less often, in fact. When we have that nice layer of mulch, we're actually regulating the soil temperatures. What we have found is that 2 to 3 inches of mulch, 4 inches down, that soil is 10 degrees cooler than the air temperatures. That's significant, especially when we get into those triple digits. Mulch also reduces soil compaction and erosion. And the additional benefits is that it's going to reduce weeds, preventing those weed seeds from germinating. It's going to feed the soil as it decomposes. It's going to also provide habitat for beneficial insects, which is all incredibly amazing. So if there isn't anything else you're doing to your garden, please add mulch. We're also going to make sure, though, that we're keeping it away from the stem or the trunk of the plant. We always want to make sure that the crown of the plant has airflow and is free of any type of leaf litter or mulch. And then cover crops. This is the best time of year to take advantage of cover crops. So cover crops, I feel like don't get enough attention or recognition. They're extremely affordable. You can go to your local garden center and most likely pick up a little packet of seeds of cover crops, or you can go to your local farm supply, or you can order them online. But cover crops, my favorite being fava beans, are excellent to plant in any of your veggie beds that you are not growing a winter crop. We do not want to let any of your garden beds just to lay bare. We really want to make sure we always have something in them, because when we have something growing, it's actually protecting that soil. It's enhancing the nutrients of that soil. It's keeping that microbiology in that soil happy and healthy. And you've spent so much time and energy getting growing healthy soil that we want to not let all that energy go to waste. We really want to keep it going. So we do that in the form of cover crops. And many of the cover crops are actually going to replenish the nitrogen, actually capturing nitrogen in the air and creating little nodulars on the root zones of the plants. So when we're ready to plant our next spring crops, we just cut those cover crops to the ground. We do not pull them out. And then we plant our spring crops near the root zones of that cover crop. And then those new root zones can weave in with the cover crop and access all that beautiful nitrogen you just captured. The cover crops also improve the soil structure and the water holding capacity. So another way to keep water in your soil for longer. And then we're going to look at how to hold on to rainwater when we get it. We're going to look at slowing that runoff. We want to prevent any water from running off our property. We want it all. We want to be really, really stingy with that water. We want to keep it all to ourselves, okay? We want to then have that water spread out into planters throughout the garden and over any pervious surfaces. We want to allow that water sink back into the ground, okay? We really want it to stay in the ground on our property. And we can also look at storing that water for future use. Now, what does that all look like? Well, we're going to prevent runoff, because some of the benefits of preventing runoff is that, one, we get to hold on to that water for future use. But through the eyes of our city workers, when we prevent runoff, we're also reducing overloading those storm drains, okay? We're also going to prevent pollutants that can be contaminating those waterways, because they're going to stay on our property and get filtered out through our soil. And then we're also, when we can prevent runoff, we're also going to prevent any loose mulch or soil or any other debris that could be moving with that water that could clog that storm drain. So these are all things that we want to do to help our the waste or the stormwater treatment people. We want all those folks to be happy. So we keep them happy by keeping the water on site. And then when we keep the water on site, we're also keeping our gardens happy and healthy. We're going to increase the permeable surfaces. If we have a landscape project in the future, keep in mind when we have dry laid patio stone or gravel or decomposed granite that has not the decomposed granite can be made permanent with a binding agent. When we do not use the binding agent, when we leave it as just the decomposed granite that's been packed, gravel and dried laid patio stone, all of these allow water to actually infiltrate, to actually go down deeper into the soil, where it can continue to access those root zones of plants. We can consider planting a rain garden or a seasonal creek, which can, a rain garden is going to be a shallow basin. It's not deep, it's not a pond, it's just a very shallow basin, typically 6 to 8 inches. We're going to plant it with native plants that can thrive in wet winter conditions as well as summer dry conditions. And we have these positioned around the garden so that when we have rain come down, it actually, any runoff from the roof or overflow from the rain barrel actually is going to hold on to that water and allow it to sink in deeper. Excellent to have a band or a swale of a rain garden or a seasonal creek in front of like a line of established hedgerow or trees, so that we know that through the winter months, we can really hold on to that water and allow that water to get really deep for deeply rooted established trees and shrubs. This is an example of just some plants you can plant in a rain garden so they can look really beautiful. But again, this is just a small 9 plants that I've picked out of a huge list of plants that would be appropriate for a rain garden. And then fall maintenance around the garden. What that looks like this time of year is picking up any fallen food crops, such as those apples that have fallen on the ground, or harvesting any of those tomatoes that they've gotten a little too mushy. We're kind of done with the tomato season or the summer squash season. So let's clean all of that up so that we're not going to attract pests like yellow jackets, rats, mice, and other urban critters. We're going to pick up any fungal spores. So my roses, any roses that had any diseased leaves, that black spot, that rust, I want to pick those up. I don't want them sitting on the ground over the winter. I want to get them into the green waste bin so that they can go to the municipal compost. Because if they stay on site, they stay at the base of my roses, those spores are going to overwinter and then come back up as soon as my roses start to leaf out in the spring. We're going to feed with that low nitrogen organic fertilizer. And so this might be the last feeding for the season before the winter months come on. And then we're going to plant those cover crops to protect the soil in the garden beds. We're also going to find that nice balance between cleaning everything up and leaving some plants be, so that we could offer food and support that garden ecology. So this is this really cool website I just that's new to me. It's called healthyyards.org. They're in New York, but their really cool motto or mission statement is: changing your yard practices might be the easiest way to fight climate change and support your local ecosystem. I just think it's beautiful. And what that looks like to me is letting some plants go to berry, such as the elderberry or the snowberry, even the acorns. These provide so much nutrients for our birds, the other critters in our garden, such as the squirrels, although some of us don't want to encourage squirrels. But then also letting the asters and the clematis and the Japanese anemones go into seed, go into flower. The birds are still utilizing and feeding off of the seeds from my garden, which includes the echinacea, the sunflowers, the asters. And then they're taking the little tufts from the Japanese anemone and making their nesting material with it for the winter. So, as well as the clematis. So just know that there's, we can leave some leaf litter. We can leave some stems. We don't have to cut everything down. We don't have to make everything look really clean and polished. Having a little bit of wild and woolly in our gardens actually is supporting the ecology. We're going to inspect our irrigation, making sure any breaks are fixed. We're coming out of a really long, dry summer. Critters are very likely to have gnawed on some of those emitters to access water. This is not unusual. So it is, again, a nice thing to go and check. And I think that this number here, where a broken or missing sprinkler head could waste as much as 25,000 gallons of water and $150 a month. I think that $150 is really conservative. I think it's actually a little bit more than that. So yeah, we want to just, again, make sure the water's going where we want it to go and there's no leaks out there. And then I had mentioned earlier, converting pop-up sprinklers to drip. We want to, it's very easy, it's very inexpensive, and you're actually going to save a lot of money and water if you can take advantage of this. We're going to look for those rain harvesting, lawn be gone, and irrigation efficiency rebates for all of these systems. And then we want to capture that rainwater whenever possible. Understand that 1 inch of rain over 1,000 square foot surface, we can capture over 600 gallons of water. It's amazing. And there's rain catchment systems for any style of property that you have, long and narrow ones to go along the side of a house. We have the large cisterns, such as in the top left picture. Whatever our budgets are, whatever shape of our properties are, there is a rain catchment system for that. And what I can share is that you might just start with one 55-gallon barrel, such as the lower left picture of the blue rain barrels. And then over time, you can daisy chain them. You can add another 1 or 2, add another 1 or 2. And before you know it, you're capturing hundreds of gallons of water that you can now water your garden with. So we're not even using the municipal water to water our gardens. We're using rainwater, which is actually loaded with a lot of minerals as well. And then we can look at incorporating greywater systems, such as setting up laundry to landscape water, accessing water from our laundry. It's an excellent way to water trees and shrubs, fruit trees and vines, because we're actually getting a lot of gallons. It's a lot of gallons, many gallons of water that are going to come out and get distributed throughout the garden. So it's a great way to get that volume of water out to plants that really like, to have 4 or 6 gallons of water at one time. It also can get distributed in a way that each plant is just getting 1 gallon or so. It's pretty cool, but look into it. It's very easy. It's very economical to install. You can get more information at the greywateraction.org. We're going to look at rebates. Emily is our guest here yet.
Yes, she is.
Great.
Yeah,
Great.
Elise is here, and I can allow, I think through the settings, bring her in and invite her to share, introduce herself. Elise, if you want to, if you're there, you can come out off mute and let us know about some of the rebates that might apply for our region.
Hi, Lise.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elise with Solano County Water Agency, and our agency works closely with the community. We offer a couple rebates. Our main one is the one you see here, the Water Efficient Landscape Rebate Program. And what Suzanne and Emily were talking about today really applies to our landscape rebate program. So we offer $1.50 for every square foot of grass removed and replaced with drought tolerant landscape. And if you use the tips Suzanne gave you, then it'll work out perfectly, and you can get up to $1,500 from our program.
That is so cool. That is so right on. I love it.
Yeah, and we actually offer other rebates, and you can just follow that link on the bottom there. We have for Greywater, you were just talking about that. We do have rebates for Greywater components, for rainwater capture with rain barrels. We also have rebates for stuff like for new rain barrels. So it doesn't cover everything, but it does help, and it will help transform your yard into more of a living ecosystem.
That's incredible. I love it. See, there is money on the table. Thank you. Thank you, Solano County Water Agency, for making our dreams come true in our garden by giving us some money to plant gorgeous plants.
Yes, yeah, and we encourage it. So yeah, thank you so much for putting this on, and really excited to see the projects that the community does and follows through.
Yeah, it is really neat. Thank you. I have another slide that is talking about the Quell professional training. Emily or Elise, are either of you interested in sharing a little bit more about the Quell training that's available right now?
Yeah, sure. And Emily, you can take over after this. So basically, I took this last year, and if you're interested in the certification, it's more geared towards landscape professionals. But if you're in any form of industry relating to native plants, landscaping, gardening, things like that, this might be of interest to you. It's free, except I believe there's a small fee associated with the final exam to get qualified. It starts in 2 weeks, November 7th, and I believe that there should still be time to register, and everything's online except the actual exam. So it really takes a lot of the information that you were talking about, Suzanne, and it just builds on that so you can get QUEL certified. So it's Qualified Water Efficient Landscaper is what QUEL stands for. And we work with Cal WEP to put that on for basically anyone within the county, as well as neighboring counties like Napa and the rest of the Bay.
Yeah, and for any master gardeners that are joining us today, because I know there are quite a few, this would be something that I'd highly recommend. I myself took the QUEL training a couple years ago. It really supports the message, the gardening message, I guess you'd say. It really helps us have a better understanding of how irrigation works on the landscapes. So please consider this. It's a really cool training.
Yeah, and if you have any questions, please, you can reach out to the number in the link, but we can also, you can reach out to me or Emily or Suzanne. And then I've taken it, and it's super interesting, and it really just builds onto everything you've learned today.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Elise.
Thank you.
All right. We just have a couple more slides and then we're going to wrap up. So a few other online resources that I always like to share is, of course, the Our Water, Our World website for pest management suggestions, and then the UC statewide IPM program, their website, which is just a wealth of information. It really helps us identify what's going on in the garden. Bugguide.net is a really cool resource as well. If I've got an insect that I cannot identify, I like to take a picture of it. I send it to bugguide.net and they let me know pretty quickly. The reason why bugguide.net is so important is because if we can't identify that insect, we can't make any assumptions. We need to know what it is so that we can identify if it's the pest or if it's a beneficial. And then if it's the pest, then we learn how to manage it. And then the National Pesticide Information Center is also one of my favorite go-tos because I like to understand the active ingredients of the pesticides I use. And though I'm only using eco-friendly products, I still want to understand the impact, for instance, the neem oil and any unintended consequences that I might not consider because I know it's registered for organic use, but there might be something that I don't know about. So I always like to review with the National Pesticide Information Center first. UCIPM also has information on active ingredients as well. And then all of the educational programs that Fairfield Sassoon Sewer District has sponsored are going to be on their website. It's the webinars that we've created here, as well as some other programs that they have. You can view the recorded educational webinars at fssd.com/public outreach. And as I mentioned, I will have all of these websites on an info sheet that I will be sending out shortly. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time and attention for joining us. I'm Suzanne Bontempo. You can find me at Suzanne Bontempo at plantharmony.org. Please feel free to email me at any time if any questions come up. And you can also follow me at Plant Harmony on Instagram.
Great. Thanks, Suzanne. And thanks, Elise, for jumping in and sharing more about some of the rebates that the Solano County Water Agency has available. Those are great resources for us. So we have one question that came through the Q&A about some of the pest, I'll say it's pest related. Are there recommendations that you could share to discourage stray cats?
Oh,
it's like, oh, is it a pet? I mean, it's not a pet.
Yeah.
This
A stray cat is a pest if it's causing, unfavorable situations on our garden.
Yeah. So turning your lovely garden into their personal litter boxes is
Yeah.
the specific.
Our next program is on fall pest management, and I do have some slides on cats, believe it or not, but not to be a big spoiler about that program, but really there are some products you can, if you're out there in the garden, you can blast them with some water. So you get just a spray bottle and you can squirt them with water. There are sensor water devices. So when a cat or anything is in the garden, it gets blasted with water. Sometimes people will leave it on when their kids don't even know, and so their kids get blasted by accident, but then they think it's really funny. You can have a lot of fun with the family, especially during the heat of the summer. But these types of tools are really helpful to train the cats not to come to this area. There's also things, repellent on the market, like cat scram, other cat repellents. But understand that the repellents are just going to be temporary deterrents if they work, so some cats just don't care that that smell is really bad. They're still going to use that area. So it's like their threshold versus your threshold. So you can try some of the repellents on the market, and I would try a couple different ones if one doesn't work. And then you can get these cat mats that they're called cat scat mats. You can find them online, but then really sometimes just putting some chicken wire, open up some chicken wire, putting it out there, or 1/2-inch hardware cloth or something. You can even put a little dusting of mulch on top if you don't want to see it. You do have to anchor it down with landscape pins. Then the cats can't really scratch the area.
Oh, interesting. Okay, great. Well, I hope that answered the question of the participant who asked the question. If you have any follow-up, let us know. One question I have, Suzanne, is, so I did a sheet mulching project in my front yard, and we're kind of doing some work on the house. And so I'm not quite ready to plant my garden yet. And you mentioned the cover crops, and we also have a very thriving deer population in our neighborhood. And so I'm wondering, like, are there cover crops that I could be planting now that would kind of hold my mulch until I'm ready to turn it into a garden that would also be deer resistant?
I haven't had the deer nibble the cover crops on my garden, and we are open. So and I'm just really trying to think of, over the years, has a deer ever nibbled even by accident? So for some reason, I don't see that the fava beans attract deer, or I've never seen damage on fava beans. And maybe one of our guests might have a different experience. And if you do, put it in the chat. That's something you could try. Red clover is something I'll sprinkle those seeds out in the late winter, early spring, when we're still getting those, like February rains. Yeah, that's when I put red clover out. But this is the time of year, and I know that the deer don't bother the red clover, but this time of year, I really strictly am just working with fava beans because they're so easy. And they're also providing food. Those fava bean tips, you saute them with a little garlic and sesame oil. It's delicious.
Great. Okay, I'm going to give it a try, and I'll let you know.
Okay.
How it goes. So any other questions for Elise about their rebate programs, or anybody who's maybe tried using a rebate program and has some lessons learned, some things that worked, didn't work? We always like feedback on that kind of thing.
Well, I hear often that people will have removed their lawn and then they go for the rebate, and you really have to leave that lawn in place before you go through the application process. So if you want to transition your lawn out, don't touch it. Go through the application process first, because there's requirements. I think you all, they have to check the lawn or something. They have to see the space. They have to see the conditions. I'm not exactly sure, but I've talked to folks saying that they kind of blew it. So that's one thing I've heard.
Yeah, if I can jump in.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, we do just have to do pre-inspection, but we finally went digital, so you can submit all your information online now. We just have to approve it first. So you just have to show us that you have grass, dead or alive. And then we do a final inspection. And we love when your lawns look like what Suzanne was trying to encourage you to do. We want more than just fake grass or something like that. So we don't actually rebate for fake grass or concrete. We're looking for sustainable landscaping that encourages biodiversity.
Nice. That's beautiful. All right.
Well, great. Should we do a little plug for our next webinar?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Our next webinar, do you have the description up by chance?
I do have the description. And I believe we have it scheduled for Friday, November 18th.
Yep.
So another Friday, another lunch and listen. Hopefully some of you are out there doing that. And the focus, as Suzanne mentioned, is going to be on fall pest prevention and taking a sustainable approach to pest management for home or garden pest problems. So getting ahead of fall pests with useful seasonal tips, thinking before we use toxic chemicals in our home, garden. So that, yeah, should be great. I really appreciate the timing of these, like thinking about, we're about to get rain. How can we be managing that water on our landscape in a way that's responsible and good for our homes, and be able to reuse that water as much as possible, and for what flows off of our property and into storm drains, eventually into creeks and into the marsh or into the bay. So yeah, those are great tips. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. This has really been a lovely lunch and listen. It's fun. Enjoy the rest of your day. Have a beautiful Friday. Have a beautiful weekend, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Thanks everybody for joining.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.